Hey there, brilliant people. So today's question was a slightly longer one, insofar as I was talking with someone about how with fractology we work with holographic awareness, and they were asking about how does that link to some of the sort of spiritual concepts out there. So we're going to have a bit of a look at it today. So if you've got my book, The Soul's Brain, you can have a bit of a read of it yourself. But I'm going to use this as a reference because this is something I've talked about in here. And in fact, oh look, opened directly onto the page I was after. So on page 137, it looks at how we make a hologram, scientifically, how we make a hologram, and the creation myths, which are a lot of sort of the framework for a lot of spirituality in different cultures, how the two of them link up. So hopefully it will give you a bit more of an understanding of how holographic perspectives and the spiritual perspectives are actually, linked or aligned. So I'll read the creation myth, and then I'll talk about the different stages of creating a hologram, and we'll talk about each one a little bit. So in the creation myths, so a lot of the creation myths start by talking about how in the beginning or before the beginning, so before creation, everything was one. It was one source, or just everything was all mixed in together in one sort of creative ocean. So with the hologram, we actually start with a kind of light called coherent light. Now, coherent light is what is in a laser. So a coherent light is all the same frequency, and even more than that, all the little photons in the laser, they're all going up and down at the same time, because light travels in waves. Well, this light is traveling in step. So in other words, just in the those creation myths and in the hologram, we start from the same place with everything being one. And then in the creation myth, what happens is that unity is then split into a duality. So whether it's the sea is split from the sky, or the earth from the sky, or the earth is split from the ocean, or night and day, there's some kind of duality is introduced. And that's exactly the same thing as what happens with the next step with the hologram, is that our laser, our coherent light, is split into two beams, because with a laser we can tell very much the direction of the laser. So now the one light, it's split so that you now have a laser going in this direction and a laser going in that direction. So same light, but traveling two different paths. And of course, in the creation myths, they talk about how the pairs, night and day or whatever, they're not really opposites. At least that's not how they start out. They're really more like a complementary pair, which is, essentially when we have two laser lights, but they came from the same coherent light to begin with. We know that they're still the same. They just have a different alignment. And then in our creation myth, we have one of those dualities is connected to the source, to the spiritual source, whatever that is conceived to be, whether it's ancient wisdom or Mother Earth or, some patriarchal God, I suppose. So whatever the concept is of that spiritual source, in our creation myths, one of those polarities is connected more to that. Whereas the other polarity is actually more well, it's disconnected from that. So there's some kind of fall, in other words. So, I was brought up Catholic, of course, the fall is, originally everything was with God, but eventually we get to, like the fall of, Lucifer, who then becomes Satan or whatever. So there is some kind of one of the polarities disconnect from the source. So when we're working then with the hologram, we have the same thing happen. Like one of our two beams, because our beam has been split, so one of those beams stays exactly as is, but the other one is actually bounced off whatever it is that we want to make a hologram of. So if you wanted to make a hologram of the Earth, you'd bounce it off a model of the Earth, say. And because of that, it then becomes distorted by whatever it has been bounced off of. You could say it's picked up the information of that image. Of course, energetically, we would probably say, you've just bounced it off your thought. You put your concept of whatever it is you want to create into that energy. But anyway, we're getting back to the hologram. All right. So essentially back to the spiritual stuff, the creation myths. In the creation myths, you have that one source is omnipresent. So it's in everything and it's everywhere, it's all spiritual. In the hologram, it's the same thing. Like when we bounce that, the object beam, it's called, when we bounce one of our beams off whatever it is we're taking a hologram of, we then shine it onto the holographic plate, and it doesn't really look the same as what you'd expect like a photographic negative to look like. It doesn't look anything like the image at all. It just looks like a scatter pattern of light. And because we also shine the other beam onto there as well, they meet up again on the holographic negative. So we still have that same energy that we started with is still on that negative. It's still kind of like everywhere. And in fact, because what I do is fractology, so of course there's actually a link between the holographic negative and the fractal, because that holographic negative, that's actually what it is. It's a fractal scatter pattern of light. Right, and so then when we come back to the spiritual side of things, there, in order to manifest something or to receive a blessing or, to connect with the presence of the source, that's what we need to do. We need to connect to the presence of the source to get that blessing, to get that manifestation. And holographically, if we're going to then take our holographic negative and use that to then get, our hologram, what we need to do is shine the original laser, the original coherent light, back through our holographic negative. And that's when the hologram of the Earth, or whatever it is that we've taken the photo of, that's when that will, appear in the space. And because of this whole process in the creation myth on the spiritual side of things, one of the sort of principles that results from that is the principle of as above, so below. And very much in holographic stuff, we get the same thing, because we see that, when you break a hologram, you may have heard of this. When you break a hologram, you actually end up with lots and lots of smaller holograms. It's a little bit different. Like if you smash up a normal picture, you would end up with a jigsaw puzzle. But when you smash up a hologram, you actually end up with mini versions of the hologram in each piece. So how can that happen? Well, as I mentioned already, there's actually a holographic pattern. No, of course it's a holographic pattern. There's a fractal pattern. And if you remember what a fractal is the same pattern repeated over and over again to build up a more complex pattern, like a tree. Like that's why if you break a twig off a tree, it'll look like a miniature tree. Well, the same thing has happened with your hologram. You smashed it up, now you've got little mini holograms in each piece. So what does all that mean? Well, it means that of course a lot of those spiritual, cultural creation myths, a lot of those were created and shared before we actually had holograms, before we had the science to create holograms or to understand really what they were. And now, of course, physicists, they're looking around at our world and looking at the fact that this wall may appear solid, but actually it's more space than anything else because of the way atoms are structured. So while this may not appear like a hologram to us, it actually has a holographic nature. It is kind of like a hologram. It's just a little bit more solid. So in other words, all the creation myths, all these spiritual tales, they're ways for us to understand our reality, but a modern retelling of those tales, well, how a hologram is created, it's kind of like a modern retelling. And that is where we get this link between fractology or holographic thinking and spiritual thinking. And why the fractal is important, because just like a tree, when that pattern becomes broken or distorted, the tree is in trouble. Well, if we break our pattern, if we step out of our integrity, we also get into trouble. So that is also why there is spirituality at the heart of both of these things. Because to me, spirituality is living in your integrity. Anyway, so there you are. I hope that's given you some insight as to how holographics and developing a holographic view of things and spirituality, how they're linked. If you have any questions about it, if that all seems a bit too esoteric or the opposite, if it all seems a bit too sciencey, give me your questions in the comments below and we can discuss them. That'd be great. But until then, keep working with your own pattern and remember that you're brilliant.